The main beats of the story remain the same, but otherwise I changed a lot. The original myth is based on the Tairamakian, but as with most myths, it's always told from the point of view of big important men like the princes, the kings, the heroes, the villains. But there were a lot of women in this story that seemed to be mostly used to kind of move the story along. I wanted to tell the story from their perspective. Any great retelling starts with a question, what if? And the question I wanted to ask was, what if we heard the story from the perspective of one of the women in the story? Supanmacha is interesting because she's one of many love interests for Hanuman, but she's also the daughter of his enemy and ultimately betrays her father to help the man she loves. My question was, what was that like for her? What made her choose to do that, and how much inner conflict did she have over it? It was a question I found fascinating. I also wanted to ground the myth in a kind of semi-historical reality. The original myth is an epic myth, with all sorts of magic, big battles, gods. But I wanted to ask, if something like this really happened, what would that have looked like? I wanted to incorporate elements of real Thai folk beliefs. Some of the things of which I did grow up with, such as the belief in ghosts and belief in spirits. Some that I didn't grow up with directly, but is still real practice and is still real beliefs that people have, such as Thai occult practices.
So I definitely changed the ending because that was the one thing from the original Hans Christian Andersen story that I did not like. And I had this original tale from a childhood, and I remember feeling very off with the way the original tale ended, and I wanted to change it for a bit more of a better beat. But I didn't want her to have the prince at the end either, so I wanted her to more forge her own way and become her own person, and that was definitely the main goal of retelling that story, was to get that ending different. I did do other changes throughout the story, like I had to set it up a little differently to get to that ending, so I definitely took out the old witch. I took out a few other bits that were in the original tale, modified them a little bit more, but again, I hit the same beats, but just the way I hit them was a little different each time.
So Black Annis is a bogeyman character. She would have been used by parents to warn their children not to play too far from home or stay out late and talk to strangers and get lost. So the folklore surrounding her is much more about her as a character than about stories. So in that sense, what I wrote about Annis herself, including her appearance and the things she does, such as sticking an arm through the small windows, her howl that can be heard 5 miles away, and appearing in the form of a cat, that's all taken directly from the original folklore. But the legend itself is pretty ancient. John Hayrick's poem, which describes Black Annis and her bower, was written in 1797. The location appeared in property deeds in the 1760s, and 100 years before that there was a festival held every year at Black Annis's bower. And because a lot of people at that time would have been illiterate, there's no kind of written record of her before that. So there's no real way of knowing how ancient this legend is, but she could quite possibly have gone back to, pre-Christian times in the Dark Ages. But by the time my story's set in the 1910s, that sort of folklore was kind of on its way out. The bower itself was overgrown at that time. The land was owned by property developers who would build over it very soon after. So basically, while the character of Black Annis herself is very similar to the original folklore, transmuting that to an early 20th century setting is very different.
To bring this story into the modern day, I decided that the bones of the story needed to remain the same, really. So the first part of the story is pretty much the original folktale, just retold in my own words. And then the second part of the story, I've put my own modern day twist on it.
For the Fairy Midwife, I really didn't try to change much. I tried to stick as close to the original as I could. Obviously, I had to change a few things to make it a little bit more modern as to why she would be going out there and how they would take advantage of the changes in the world to better suit them. I did add in one of my personal favorite mythical creatures, the Dullahan, just because I thought it would be nice to see more of like the court and that supernatural element. As far as the Skogsra, again, that was pretty much my own design, but I did really want to try and stay true to the character as I read them when reading through all of their folklore and like all the different things you can find about them in regards to like media.
It's an interesting question because the way that I came up with the story was that I went through the poem pretty much line by line and stanza by stanza and flipped it around so that everything that happens in each stanza is something that happens during the lifetime of the protagonist. So, kind of a little and a lot at the same time. So all I really did was just kind of transpose what was happening in the imagery of the poem and just kind of sewed it together along the lifeline of the protagonist, making it just a little bit darker than it already was, just for fun.
So in the original mythology, selkies weren't usually captured to provide information or help people out or anything, and they were nothing to do with sea witches at all. But other than that, I mostly stuck to the original folklore.
Not much of it. The storyline is the same. I added a few detail changes and I made it from Rumpelstiltskin's perspective. But other than that, the main events are still the same as the original folklore. It's just from his point of view.